being recorded. Cool. So normally I do the intro for someone else, but I'll do it for myself today. Billy is in Ohio currently. We'll see. He has a little intro video. He'll tell us a little bit about that later. But today is our introduction to SQL workshop. I'm really excited to present this for you guys because I think this is a really great opportunity for PhD students or even other graduate students who are really interested in industry, who haven't really had the exposure to types of languages and things that they might need in industry jobs. So this is something I hope you guys can put on your resume if you're applying to a data science job that really requires SQL experience, and you can say, hey, at least I've been introduced to it and I have some general knowledge about it before you leave and attempt to get other jobs. So I'm going to pop some links in the chat. There are some things you need in the download from the GitHub. So I would recommend downloading from the COG Summer Workshops 2023 before we get started. There is a little cheat sheet for SQL in there that we'll be needing later. In addition, the actual SQL workshop page is here. And then I highly recommend following along on the HTML file, which I'll also link here, because we don't want you to have our markdown file and see all the answers. Unless you really want that, you can look at that and open that. But it'd be nice if people can kind of troubleshoot and try and figure these things out live on their own. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and we are going to get started. Minimize this. So Billy did all the videos, so this is what we will start with. And please let me know if there's any issues screen sharing or if there's like black boxes and stuff. I've seen this happen with some of the other workshops. Oh wait, I always forget. I have to share with sound. Okay, there we go.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to another installation of the COG 2023 Summer Workshop Series. My name is Billy, if we have not previously met. Today, we're going to be going over SQL, which is a really important language for a lot of different sort of like fields and very important in industry work. I unfortunately can't be there with you today. It looks like I'm in prison, but I'm just at Ohio State. So Katie is going to be walking you through the tutorial today, and she'd done most of the heavy lifting for this, so you guys are in really good hands. So let's start off by just talking a quick introduction about what SQL is, right? So SQL is actually an acronym, although it's like a little twisted. So it stands for Structured Language Query. And you can mostly just think about it as like another programming language, right? It's got like a slight little twist in that SQL is really only effective when it's connected to SQL servers. So you could kind of think of SQL like Git and a SQL server like GitHub, right? Where you are using this language in order to pass information back and forth between some sort of like a repository or some sort of like a server, right? And again, we call them SQL servers for a reason. So what is a SQL server? So a SQL server is a specialized server or computer which manages multiple terabytes worth of data in a structured and secure manner. I mean, these could sometimes be hundreds of terabytes of data. Again, this is a very common tool used in industry. So you think about Facebook, Netflix, Google, Apple, any sorts of these like really, really large companies that are harvesting your data constantly, so they have a ton of it. They're going to be using SQL or some derivative of SQL to manage all of that data and to access that data whenever they need to run whatever analyses that they need to run. So some of the advantages of a SQL server are that they do have a lot of security protocols to determine who can query, update, or delete data at any given time, right? There are a lot of permissions that are set by the server manager. It has automatic backup systems and data protections. So even if somebody does make a mistake or there's some sort of an outage or some sort of damage, the SQL server generally will perform automatic backups so that you don't need to worry about losing your data. And the other great thing is that SQL you can interact with SQL to facilitate large-scale data retrieval and analysis, right? So it's often going to be the case that we don't want to pull out all all of the terabytes of the data in our database in order to do our analysis. That would take weeks probably just to get that onto your computer, if your computer could even handle it. And even if it could handle it, like what kind of a program are you going to open, right? Excel has a certain number of rows it's allowed to have before it just craps out. What SQL allows us to do is, before we even get that data, just subset it on the server that it exists in, and then only pull in the data that we really care about, and allows us to run analyses on that data in an energy and time efficient manner. Again, right? It's very quick. You don't necessarily have to wait for it to go through and find that data for like hours at a time. It can find it in like almost an instant. Again, it's also very energy efficient. You don't have to have like a supercomputer at every desk, right? You could just have your laptop. You could just have some sort of a desktop, and it's still able to work with these really large scale data sets. And again, like I mentioned, it's also just a really important language if you do decide that you're going to go into industry, tech, any sort of a situation where they have these really large data sets that they want to protect and which inform how they make decisions within their company. So just a quick roadmap of what we're going to be doing today, or I should say what Katie is going to be doing with you guys today, because I can't take credit for it, unfortunately. So yeah, we're going to start off by downloading the necessary prerequisites. This is honestly, I think, going to be a big part of what we're going to be doing today, just because it can be, you know, a little bit confusing. I think Katie's done like a really fantastic job outlining those steps in a really clear manner. We tested these pretty extensively, so hopefully the issues are minimal at this stage. But once we get past setting up those necessary prerequisites, then we're going to show you how to set up the SQL Server in Rstudio and Jupyter Notebook, depending upon what your preference is. Then we're going to go on to building an example database in SQL so that we can work in that and teach you guys things about syntax, data structure, and functions in SQL. Luckily, relative to like a lot of other languages, I think SQL is pretty accessible. There's not like a ton of complication with the functions. It's like pretty simple stuff. You can obviously make it a lot more complex if you want to like get more advanced, but the basics can be picked up pretty quickly usually. So we're going to test that out with some SQL practice. And then after that, we're going to get a little bit more advanced and show you how you can use SQL to integrate with R to run like analyses and descriptive statistics. So I think with that being said, let's get started.
All right, let me close this. There we go. And I'll pop this back out so I can see a couple of you. All right, so Billy covered that really well. I really like the way he presented everything. It's actually my first time watching that video all the way through. So I think that's a really great start, and I kind of cover a lot of what he was talking about here. I think the analogy to Git and GitHub is a really, really good one, something you should keep in mind while we're doing this. It explains a lot about why we're doing what we're doing and how it kind of functions in the background. I think I was really kind of confused for a while, like, why do we care about this and what's really important about SQL? So we wanted to include that in the beginning. So I think most of this is really been covered, but I do want to point, this is something that like I found this on Reddit, and this was like the reason why I wanted to do this workshop and the reason why I kind of looped Billy in. I was like, hey, let's do this for the coding outreach group. So this is kind of a little graph showing what languages are really important in different types of data positions that you might have if you were to move on and go and get an industry job later on in life. And I think you can see most jobs minus research scientist and machine learning engineer, SQL is one of the most important things to have in your back pocket. So hopefully this is a really good introduction for you guys. I think most people who are in the coding outreach group kind of have a sense of coding in general and how to code. So I don't think this is going to be a really difficult thing, but I think it's kind of good to have the tools to take this a step further after the workshop as well. So to start, we were talking a little bit about what a SQL Server is. They're often referred to as relational database management system. And this is kind of where I got tripped up in the beginning, actually creating this workshop. There are tons of these RDBMSs. There's so many of them. And so the one we're using today is technically Microsoft SQL Server, but there are a lot of them. And when the one you choose generally won't be up to you because you'll be using them at a job. A lot of them are paid for. The ones that obviously we're going to use today are free, but these different servers actually have small different requirements within each server, which is really annoying. So everything we are learning today will be very particular to MS SQL, but most of the concepts and ideas kind of do transfer, and you can find translators online. Okay, I have this syntax for MS SQL. What does it look like in MySQL, something like that. So to start today, I'm going to actually let you guys kind of do this on your own. If you have a Windows computer, you should be able to do this no problem. Just follow the instructions under setting up a SQL server. Helen, you did volunteer to see if you could figure out how to do this on a Mac. If you have any thoughts or ideas about that currently, you're welcome to let people know. I know, Kim, you're at your desk, so you probably are on a Mac. But even if you don't have the server set up, I think the concepts we'll still go over. I'll still talk a little bit about like the syntax and like key functions that there are. And then for the examples, so the way I've structured this today, because it is such an easy language to learn, what I've done is actually I have a bunch of examples and I give you a cheat sheet, and you kind of just have to figure out what functions that you'll be using to complete those examples. So you can kind of do that anyway, even if you don't physically have something in front of you to run the functions with, but we can do that together. I can even run it on my computer. But so if people want to take a second and start setting that up now, that was me. I'm going to let you guys do that for the next 10-15 minutes. Hopefully it won't take that long. Honestly, I think with the instructions, it shouldn't take too long. The downloads aren't too cumbersome. But let me know if there's any issues or anything like that. Sam, you might be the only one setting up, so let me know how long it takes you.
Yes, I'm setting up.
Yeah, and let me know if you have issues.
All right, I'll turn on. Okay, I will.
Yeah, it's pretty detailed. I try and there is a slight typo here. I have to fix this. I already opened an issue on GitHub. But you kind of see like the steps and what it should be anyway. And then we'll go on to figure out how to use SQL Server in R, which is actually my favorite part about this workshop, because using it in R is really cool. And then it gives a really easy way to kind of integrate it with analyses, which is not something SQL itself does. So, and just to be clear, SQL is just Git. It's just pulling data. That's all. So there are other things you have to do to be able to use that data and analyze it, and whatever you would do in a data science position. So I'll just pause here. And if there are any questions, feel free to ask. Kim, you're also welcome to try, and I sent out a link on how to set up in Mac. I just was not able to get it to work on my desktop yesterday. This workshop was supposed to be done on August 17th originally, so I would have had time to troubleshoot. So it might be something that we kind of append later, more information and stuff like that after the workshop is done.
It's all right. I have used like MySQL Workbench before. However, it's been a really long time. That was like in 2019. So I don't remember like exactly how I did it and what happened.
Yeah, if you can get it to work, you are welcome to try it out. I will say MySQL is different than MS SQL in terms of the syntax. I know that for a fact. So it would just be that you'd have to figure out the small translations between them, but that's a good way to figure out troubleshooting. I would say SQL troubleshooting is a little strange. The errors that you get from SQL are very unhelpful. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was going on. Based on the errors, it was a lot of copying and pasting the entire error into Google and just reading through other people's responses and what they did. It was super weird. It's not like other coding languages in that regard, at least. And I believe MySQL might have a slightly different integration when it comes to R and Jupyter Notebooks, but you might actually have an easier time with MySQL integrating it, especially into Jupyter Notebooks. I also, for MS SQL, I think that was probably one of the harder ones to integrate with Jupyter Notebooks, so I didn't really get it to work quite well. But one of the alternatives is, if people really do want to use a Mac, you can use Jupyter Notebooks online, and they actually have a SQL kernel. They have a SQLite kernel. So if, barring everything else, you should be able to open Jupyter Notebooks online and open that kernel and kind of just modify from there.
All right, I have connected.
Cool. You've gotten to
I
this
have
part?
the SQL command line open.
Okay. Okay,
Reopen.
cool. So you're up on this part.
Oh
So,
yeah, I'm up in that part.
yes. Cool. Cool, cool.
What's next?
So you have to open the ODBC data source program that you installed in step 1. And so the whole point of getting that command line open is literally just to get the where everything is. Because for some reason, so if you look at this photo, it does have like where your server is and all these other things, but it doesn't actually tell you where it is on your desktop. So this just tells you exactly where your instance of MS SQL is on your desktop. And so you use that information and you get this dialog box open. And then when you get to this part where server is, you put that location right here.
Oh, the location from the command line.
Yes, yes. I had the slight spelling error here, but it should be this, which is, for me, that's just my desktop name, and then whatever, I think it names this automatically, SQL Express, the instance name.
Yeah.
So it has that here, but it just, the command line was because it took me so long because I was putting in SQL Express over and over and over again. It was saying, error, can't find it. You need to tell it that it's on your desktop.
Okay. So name it the COG workshop.
Yes, or it could be anything, but that will be that will help you find it later.
Okay.
Whatever you name it should be something that you remember.
Uh-oh, I clicked on something. Now I have a spinning wheel. Okay. And then, so in the server, just type that address.
Yes, exactly how it was in that command line window. And it should like test it and show that it's testing the connection. Because it's just like GitHub where it's like it's living online. So you have to have an internet connection to connect to it, and you just have to make sure you're pointing to, there's like a technical way that it connects to the server. Like you have to build it in your computer, which is slightly different from GitHub.
Test completed successfully.
Cool. So you are all set. Kim, was there any other, Kim or Helen, was there any other setup that you guys wanted to pause for?
I'm still trying to get it set up through Jupyter Notebook. I installed, I installed like something that I think is like equivalent to the SQL server, but I'm trying to like connect through it through Jupyter Notebook now.
Yeah.
So I'll let you know if I'm successful in that. I found another like quick tutorial online that just like gave some specific instructions that I'm trying to follow, but
was it MySQL for the server?
It's MySQL, yeah.
That was the one I saw most commonly, and that might be the one that's best to integrate with Jupyter Notebook. So in that case, because Sam, you're following along anyway on the Windows, so we can start how to do it in R because you guys are doing it in Jupyter Notebooks anyway. So for this portion is we need an R Markdown file. This is really cool, I think, because this is, I don't know, otherwise you just have, data that you've pulled in, and what do you do with that data? It's nice to have a place, an IDE where you can actually use that data and analyze it later on. So this is the instructions on how to set up this connection in R. You have to tell R, you have to load in all these packages that deal with setting up the connection, and then you use this function right here that I have to actually connect to your SQL server. So here I have KD SQL. I think this is where you should put your server name, which is COG Workshop. I had to do it because this is just how I set it up originally on my desktop. I should actually put a note in there to change that for people so they know that when they walk through on their own. But this is just the name that you gave it, so it knows where to look for it and what it's called and how to connect to it. Sam, let me know if you have any
But
trouble.
just in the line above that, just type everything.
Yes, everything else should be exactly the same. There is other information that you can put in this command, but this works for me, and all the other ways gave me errors. So usually you are supposed to include things like the server and the database, and is it a trusted connection? For some reason through R, you don't need all of that. I think that also might have been why I was having trouble with Jupyter Notebooks, is because I wasn't sure how to integrate all this information correctly, because MS SQL does it just slightly different than everyone else, and their information pages are not quite helpful. I have big regrets starting on MS SQL for this workshop, but we will persist, and I'm sure we'll be able to figure out how to do stuff. Also, for people following along, I did figure out how to do a nice little copy code. So if you hate copying little chunks of code, you can just click this button in the top left and it'll copy it.
Oh, well, I'm too deep into it now.
That's okay. We have some later. But once you do have it all set up in your code chunks in R Markdown, all you have to do to call SQL in a code chunk is to have this, rather than, you have the brackets with the R to have an R chunk, you just have this where you say, hey, this is a SQL chunk, we're using SQL language, and then you tell it where the connection to your SQL server is, which is inside this conr variable that we created up here. So it just calls that connection every time within each chunk.
Okay. I've completed everything in that block.
Cool. And this is just something I found online that is supposed to help you connect to SQL in Jupyter Notebooks. I was able to connect and I was able to run things. But I think the issue that I was running into was I couldn't kind of import that data into Jupyter Notebooks to manipulate it. So you have to run commands a little differently. So use this PyODBC library that they have, and you set up the connection just like you do in R. But then you have to set up a cursor, and that cursor is what runs SQL commands through a Jupyter Notebook. And that's kind of where I was having issues, and I didn't want to lead people down that path if it was going to be a problem. But you have to use this cursor execute command to run SQL commands inside of the parentheses. And I was able to run them inside the parentheses, but then just couldn't do anything else with them. So that wasn't too helpful. But if you can get that to run and you can get it to integrate, that also works. There are, within the cursor, there's different functions, you can pull all of the commands that you've used within SQL within a session, or do a bunch of other things. So it's a little bit more complicated than what we have in R. Helen and Kim, are you still trying to figure out some stuff?
I think I got it to work in Jupyter Notebook, but I wound up having to use that SQLite part of it. But once I switched to that, it's very easy to set up, and so far everything seems to be going okay.
Yes,
so
you should have no problem.
Yeah. So I can also be typing up some notes if that would be helpful. Just,
and if it, there'll be slight differences, so we can pause, and honestly we can even pause and look at those differences, because it is interesting to see the small differences between the servers. And totally. I think that's so dumb, because why would you have a language that has such small differences between servers? But this is how they have it set up and how it is. So it's good to know about that stuff, I think.
Totally.
So next we want to set up our SQL database example. So unfortunately, it's really difficult to import data via CSV. They want you to kind of add the data via SQL commands, is the easiest way to kind of deal with data. So originally I really did try to figure out a way to load in a database, a really large database, to be, that we could really work in and really mess around with, but it ended up being that we just have to copy and paste these in. So in R, you should be able to set up your SQL code chunks, and then just copy and paste these commands and run them, and it should run for you.
So just keep typing these things in R?
So it would be in the code chunks. So within your R Markdown, have the SQL code chunk with the connection.
Right now I have Rstudio open. Is that wrong?
Yes, you should be in R Markdown.
Okay.
So, well, Rstudio has, you can open an R Markdown file within Rstudio.
Okay.
So you should just be able to go to click like new file, and then it should
Yep.
be, yeah, cool. And then so within, do you know how to do code chunks and things like that?
I don't know. It has to be similar to Jupyter Notebook, I guess. I don't know.
It's a
I
little
don't
different.
know.
Here, I'll put it in the chat for where's the chat? There it is. Okay. So you would do something like this. Close brackets, and then so you put something like that, and you'll see like a color difference, and it'll like create like a chunk, and then you just put the SQL commands within that kind of chunk.
Okay. So the previous stuff I should have been typing in R Markdown, not in the
So it should
console.
It's fine with the console because you are setting up this con R variable globally, so that works just fine. It would just be that if you do an R Markdown, it's something that would be, it's already written, and then you can kind of just click run, and you don't have to type it out over and over again. So you should be okay to just set up the chunks. But otherwise, I would just recommend doing it in R Markdown just so it's there and you don't have to type it out repeatedly, basically. So just to kind of walk through what these commands are and why we're doing them. So there are a couple different words within SQL that we kind of have to be aware of. So at the highest level of what we're doing is a database. So a database can contain a lot of different data. It doesn't necessarily all have to be from the same data set or user or whatever you want to say, but this is just the central place where we go to find the data we want to work with. You can have multiple databases, so that databases. So that's why you have to call them in this command here. In our purposes, we have to create the database because nothing exists within our server. We've just downloaded our server. It's brand new, but if you were to go and work at a job that does data science things, you probably already have an existing database that you use, and your job would tell you what the name is, and you'd have to say, use that database name. But in this case, we're just creating it. And then we tell the program, hey, we're going to use this database. So you don't have to continually call this. You actually have to close the particular connection with this database if you wanted to use a different database. Another thing that we should be aware about is how SQL kind of uses the word tables. So tables are kind of like data frames. They contain all the data that you're interested in, and that's kind of what you're manipulating within a database. You can have tons of tables. It doesn't, the number of them doesn't really matter. But this is kind of where you store your data. And it does work a lot like a data frame in R. So in R, you can't just load in data into nothing, into a variable. You have to create an empty data frame first, and then you load the data in. So that's what we're doing in these first 3 steps is we're creating 3 different tables with column names and what those columns will contain. So in this case, these are different data types, character, int, things like that. And giving these columns different properties. So in R, those are kind of automatically assigned, and you can change them after you've added your data in. But with SQL, it is required to have this information before, so it knows what data it's pulling in and make sure that everything coming in matches with what is already in the column. So that's actually a really important step to do that. And then I am gonna, so we're really getting into some syntax here. So I am going to talk a little bit about this before we get into actually writing commands and doing what are called queries. Queries are where you pull data. You're querying your database and different tables to pull the data you're interested in. So before we get into that, I will talk about all of this just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Is everything running all right, Sam, in R?
I have no idea.
Is it like not giving you anything?
I mean, I'm just putting the different code from the workshop into that little
Yes.
thing you put in the chat.
Yes. So there should be like a little button, a play button on the code chunk.
I've been playing.
Cool. So as long as it's not giving you an error, it should be okay. I will say if you
Oh
run,
yeah, in the console, oh yeah, I got an error. Yes.
okay.
Oh yes, it's because I ran it twice, so it's
Yes.
already an object.
Yes. And so unfortunately, what's really annoying about SQL is if there's already an object, it's really, you have to do a bunch more to kind of edit it. So if you do things wrong the first time, you have to
Oh
like redo
no.
everything. You should be okay because I have,
Because I was just copying what you wrote.
yes, yeah. And so when I was creating the code, that was a difficulty for me because I would do something and I would do it wrong. And then I'd have to like drop the table and do all these other things that I'll talk about later. But everything should be fine as is for you guys currently. So let me know if everyone can get to entering all this data in, both in R and Jupyter Notebooks. And then we'll kind of talk a little bit about all that stuff and you know, what is going on? What are all these commands? What are we doing here?
Oh wow, this is a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to have like a much larger data set to play around with because that's kind of the point of SQL. Like if you're just using a small data set like this, like you could just use Excel. Like what's the point? So I wanted to have, I had a couple databases that were very large. I just could not figure out a way to get them into MS SQL, which might have been because I chose MS SQL. It might have been easier to do it in MySQL. We do not know currently, but I'm sure if we figure that out, it'll be maybe an addition onto the workshop. What I do really like about doing this in Rstudio and R Markdown is that you kind of get to look at the data like you would if you were working in R. So you can see over in the connections box on the top right-hand corner, it shows that you're connected to the COG SQL database, and then it shows you all the tables that you just created and loaded into the data into right here. So you can actually look at the data by clicking on the little symbol over here on the right of the table and make sure all the data is loaded in correctly. For instance, when I was doing it, there were some syntax errors. So it was only loading in like the first 3 rows of the data. So this kind of was a good check for me to make sure that all the data was loaded and loaded in correctly. And these are just, this is actually an example that I got. It was actually originally in MySQL syntax, so I had to convert it from MySQL to MS SQL. So it's quite close, but they generally, the main difference, I believe, was that in MySQL, you have to have all of your int data in single quotes. So I just had to remove them for this, and everything else was mostly the same. But this is like, I feel like looking at it, if you know code, some of this makes a lot of sense. Oh, and one other thing, so when you create a database, it'll automatically come with 4, or not a database. When you have a server, it'll automatically come with 4 databases. The master, MSDB, TempDB, and sometimes model. I don't think, for some reason, MS SQL didn't have this, and it actually would have been helpful because I believe it has example data sets, databases, I'm sorry. But you should be able to see all of those as well in here. They exist, at least those 3. You can see my failed attempts at loading in data from a CSV file as well. All right, how's it going for our Jupyter Notebook people?
My SQL connection is not working, so now I'm going back to the built-in Jupyter SQLite kernel. So, which I was making like a little bit of progress on, but still not at any actual SQL code yet.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. Do you want me to pause, or do you think it's just something you want to troubleshoot in the background?
I can just troubleshoot in the background, no need to pause.
Cool, no worries. And again, like you could definitely still, I think like this part is going to be really helpful for people. Yeah. And it's, my examples are just like provide the empty, you know, the missing keyword. So it'll be pretty easy.
I don't have
Helen,
SQL.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't have SQL as well.
Helen, can you sorry.
No, go ahead.
Helen, can you send me the link for how you like loaded in the SQL kernel into Jupyter? Because I cannot do it. Like I keep checking and it doesn't pop up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can send you the link to what I'm following.
Oh,
I'm
it's
using
Okay,
the
thank you.
Zeus like SQLite
yeah.
kernel.
You might
Yeah,
need,
I'm
Kim, you
trying.
might need to do it online. So I know the Jupyter Notebook online has it automatically. I think if you want to do it like from like Anaconda or something, and like load it from your desktop to a tab online for Jupyter Notebook, it might not be there.
Okay.
I know when I did it in like I opened my Jupyter Notebook first in Anaconda and I looked for the SQLite and it wasn't there, but like just the online link to Jupyter Notebooks that has
I see.
the SQLite kernel.
I see. So even if I'm like installing it within my terminal,
Yeah. I mean, I didn't try that like extensively. It might be possible. I don't know, Helen, if you have you could just put it, if you want to just put it in the general chat as well.
Yeah, I would like to take a look for
Yeah.
future reference.
Yeah. And I think it'll be included in the recording for people who come back and watch this. So that'll be helpful. I think, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, and I don't see the server in my connections in Rstudio, and that's maybe because I started in the console. I don't know.
It should still have done a connection. Actually, so would you mind? I'm going to stop sharing. Would you be able to share your screen? Let me just give you permissions too. Just so I can, because it's easier to help you troubleshoot on that end. Oh no, that's there.
Well, okay, so here you mean?
It's just, so I think it's formatted slightly different, maybe because you did it in the terminal. So mine was like shown as something that I could like click down on, but you have the master MSDB and temp, like that's definitely your SQL.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So you just need to run the create the database command and then use. So you can create a database to load data into and then use that database to load in tables.
I did run this. Should I run it again?
Yeah, try it. Ah, it already exists. Interesting.
Yeah, because I ran it before.
That is strange. I'm not sure why it's doing that. Maybe refresh connection data on the connections tab. Yeah, see if that works. Yay, cool.
Did that? Oh, here it is.
Yep, there you go. Cool.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah, so you just, so because it was already done in the terminal, it probably was expecting stuff in the terminal and you just need to refresh a little bit. So cool. So you should be able to run the rest of the commands from there.
So you can't run this in the terminal. You have to run it in the R Markdown.
Yes, because you need the chunk to tell it that it's SQL code and where the connection is, that connection equals con R. There's probably a way to do it in the terminal, but this is, I think, the more effective way to do so. And so you should be able to click the button next to the COG SQL database, and it should be able to, you should be able to see the tables inside of it.
Like here?
Under the DBO.
Okay.
Yay, cool. And then so if you go on the right hand side and you click the little like square boxes, it should open up another window. This is good to just show people what it looks like. Yeah, go ahead, click that. Yep, there you go. So it's just like you would in R, which I really, really like. And you can actually make sure the data is all loaded in correctly and that it's all looking good. So you're all
Very nice.
cool. So I'll go back to sharing my screen and we can talk a little bit about syntax and organization of code, because this is kind of where I think it's good to talk about this stuff. And again, I've said this several times, but if you've forgotten, this is MS SQL, so it might be a little different depending on what server you're using, but the general format is the same between all of them. Obviously, as you've seen, we kind of have a general structure where you have your keywords, and your keywords are your functions. They're what the command that you're using to run the query that you want to do. So you always start with one of your keywords, and then you have your other things, and then there are sometimes keywords that are necessary to follow the original one to build on what you're doing. So for instance, in this SQL query that we're looking at here, you want to select from your country's table, you want to select the columns country ID and country name, and you only want the country ID and country name where the region ID equals 1, and then you order it by country name. So it's a little complicated, but you can kind of get the sense of, this is kind of similar to like for loops or while loops, where you're kind of looking at only selecting certain types of data to pull out into a table. And again, this is kind of what we were talking about earlier, especially Billy mentioned it in the video, where a lot of these data sets are going to be huge. It's going to be terabytes worth of data, and you might have a specific question from your employer, like what countries are doing X within our business. And so you can build these queries, and that's kind of where the complexity comes from. You have to build it in a way that makes sense and will actually pull the data that you want to query this database and get the information that you need. So the identifiers are just what we call the variable names. You can comment using this dash feature, which is really helpful. And you usually terminate with a semicolon. There are cases where I haven't needed to terminate with the semicolon, such as, I think, not these, but let me just, pretty sure I added them. So before I was able to run these commands without the semicolon. So there are certain commands where you can. I just recommend adding it in no matter what. Otherwise, everything is really straightforward. You kind of have different functions that you can perform. There are so many different things that SQL can do, but you're generally in the business of kind of pulling data in different formats. Okay, so for this part, I'm kind of going to just go through, we've already run some SQL commands, so I want to kind of talk about what those were, why we did them, and kind of what the end result was. We can scroll back up here. So like I mentioned before, we need to create the tables before we can populate them. That makes total sense, I think, to people who use R. And so just as kind of a review of what this is, so we have create because we want to create something. In this case, we wanted to create a table. Obviously up here, we created a database. We named our table agents. You don't have to name it before you populate it with the column names. And this is kind of another thing that in SQL that you can use when you have multiple lines of commands. You could put them on separate lines, but they can also be all in one line as long as they're separated by this comma. And this is just a particular command where you need to have parentheses. Certain ones you do, certain ones you don't. It all depends. So these are our column names. So the very first piece of text in each of these lines is a column name. And then we have this where we designate what type of variable it is. So in this case, the agent code is a character. There's a couple different types. I think I have, if you scroll down in the ARM or in the HTML, I have all the different data types and what they are. Pretty familiar for us. I feel like dates and times are slightly different within SQL, so you have to designate those differently, but mostly we're working with numbers and characters, which is pretty familiar, at least for me. You also can designate whether or not it can take null data, so whether you could just have blank data if you'd like. Interestingly enough, I know on this first one, we did load in blank data, but we loaded it as a space, so it doesn't register as null data. So you can kind of get around that if you'd like. But if you look at the agents table, however you've loaded it, you should be able to see that that agents column is blank. So it's not null if it's a space. I'm not sure why that is, but that's just something that a workaround that you can do. And one other thing that I kind of want to talk about here, so there are a lot of different attributes that you can use these keywords for, and a lot of different things you can kind of manipulate within these variables, these column names. So in this case, we're assigning something called a primary key, and this is a little bit more advanced, and I can talk about it later when we get into the more advanced stuff. But this is like if you're good at SQL, this is kind of something that you would employ. So I like to think about it as, say, like a subject identifier. So, for us, when we're working with demographic data and research data, a lot of the times we want to keep demographic data separate. So, we're not identifying subjects within the experimental data. The primary key is kind of like that one variable that is the same across your demographic and experimental data. So this identifies the one variable that is the same across a couple different tables, and you can kind of see, so we have agent code here, and then we have agent code in the customer table. And I don't think we have agent code here. Oh, we do. So you can put the same variable in all these different tables, and that connects all the data within these tables. And it's a nice clean way to do so. When you reference it in another table, you have to say that it references the variable in this table. So it's not referencing the actual variable name, but it's referencing the table name. And because it has to share the same exact name, it'll know that, all of the data in this customer table for this agent code, you can link it back to this and kind of manipulate data based on that as well. And I have some examples about how to do that later. This is the command where we actually load our fake data into the tables. So we use the insert into function, or keywords in this case. So the insert obviously is that you're putting something into something. There's a couple different keywords that you can use depending on what you're inserting and where. And in this case, we're inserting into our agents tables, and then you're just indicating that they are values, and then you have your parentheses, and you have everything, all of your data inside. So the things that you have to make sure that are the same is that you have the same number of data instances as there are columns. So if I was missing this, the space for I believe it's the country variable here, or column name, this would not run. So you have to make sure you have the same amount of data points as there are columns, and they have to be the correct data type that you've indicated already when you created the table. So when I was loading everything in, I had the numbers here. This is technically an integer under commission. I had it in single quotes, and I was getting errors because it didn't recognize that as an integer variable. It was recognizing it as a character variable and said, nope, I can't take a character. That's not going to happen. So these are just the kind of things you have to look out for when you are creating tables. It is very likely that if you're going to work for a company, they already have the databases and the tables already set up, and you're kind of just appending that data into those tables. But I think this is good to kind of go over these types of commands. You can kind of see, the general idea of how these things are running. Does this make sense to everyone? Does anyone have any questions or any particular things you want to go over, or any questions about the commands that we're using here? Cool. All right. I believe that's all I really wanted to talk about. I wish the outcome from this came up, but if you're interested, if you're not in RStudio, you don't have that really nice little window to show you all the data that you've loaded in, you can use the select function to pull that data and query that data to see it. So we use wildcard functions just like we do in any other language, which is really nice. So if you want to select everything from something, you just use the wildcard variable here. And interestingly enough, I know if you'll see SQL statements and stuff like that out in the wild, a lot of the times it's all capitalized. You don't have to do that. It can be, just capitalized like this, or it can be lowercase. So if you have like an aesthetic where you'd prefer to do everything lowercase, that is also possible. It's just whatever you prefer. You don't have to do it capitalized. But for people, if you are able to get Jupyter Notebooks working and you want to see the data, you could select everything from our agents table to print out all the data from that table. You can also do this in the command line or in RStudio and R Markdown, just to see the kind of difference. It'll print it out like a normal table in R. These are all the data types, like I mentioned before. We kind of went over that. This is like a really important part. I don't know, data types are really easily manipulated in other languages, and is not the case in SQL. Okay, so let's start talking about key functions. So there are a lot of functions in SQL. There are so many things you can do, but they're like super simple, and I think they're a lot of the time self-explanatory. Like I think like even just looking at the previous ones we've done, it made sense like what they were doing. You kind of could figure out. And we didn't want to introduce a function and then just have you guys do a slightly different exercise than the one the example that we provided. So we thought maybe it would be a little bit more difficult if we did it in this manner. So we provided a cheat sheet. I have the location here. You do have to download the entire GitHub to get this cheat sheet, but you can honestly, if you Google this, I'm pretty sure it would come up. It's free online. And it's just a giant PDF with multiple functions that are available in SQL, ranging from really, really easy to more complex and, multiple line functions. And I'm basically going to present you an example on like what we would like you to do within SQL. And you can use that cheat sheet to maybe try and figure out what keywords and functions that you would use within that query. So even if you didn't want to use the cheat sheet, you could Google it, because that's what we would do anyway. That's what you would do if you're working at a job and you wanted to do something. You wouldn't just have all of these functions memorized. You would say, hey, Google, how do I select a table? How do I do this? So I think this is a really good exercise in just general like researching, but also kind of being independent in how you are able to create these queries, as opposed to just like spoon feeding you the information. So I'm actually going to pause here and kind of let you guys work through this on your own. For people who don't have anything running, you can still do this. You can figure out, what keywords you might use. You're welcome to pop them in the chat if you have, if you think you've got it, or, you want to ask if this is a good way to do something. You can pop it in the chat, and I'll even put it in my our markdown if you guys are interested to see if it works. So I'm just going to pause here and kind of let you guys do your own thing for a little bit, working through these examples.
I have to head out, but
okay.
Thank
yes.
you.
Yes,
I'll
and the
watch the recording.
Yeah, and you'll be able to do the rest on your own. Honestly, it's pretty self-explanatory. Thank you for coming.
Okay, bye.
I think I got things working in Jupyter Notebooks.
Yay.
It seems to be pretty simple using the SQLite kernel. All I have to do is add like a percentage sign in front of all of the like main functions. And everything seems to be running really smoothly so far. So cool. I will just continue just like following through and seeing if I run into any issues, but so far so good.
Yeah. Let me know if you're able to create the tables and do all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you could just get started on the exercises.
Cool.
It should be pretty, I mean, I didn't go too hard. I do have, I think, 7 examples, so it's a lot. So get through as much as you guys want to. But once we're kind of feeling good about these exercises and, figuring out how to identify key functions that we want to use to do these different things, we can kind of talk about some integration and analyses in R. So actually loading in the data and then doing analyses with that data, which is pretty cool. So I'm gonna say, we'll say like 2:15, 2:20, around that time. If you guys want more time, we can do more time, but I think, I don't have too much more after this, so
cool.
Get to end a little bit early, which would be nice. I am gonna stop sharing for now, and I'm actually gonna, because I'm working on my laptop, I'm gonna download my our markdown so I can do the examples if you guys want to. I am realizing for the examples that there's supposed to be like little outlines for some of the exercises, and there's not. So that's my bad. I'll fix that. But in general, so if you guys want an example of what the outline should be, let me know. But it should be, you can still figure it out, I think.
Katie, if you did you do much with the SQLite kernel at all? No.
No, not really.
Okay.
Are you
I'm
having
just trying to figure
trouble?
out how to go back to having like a Python like
Yeah.
cell within there. And that seems to be a little bit of a doozy.
Yeah, which is annoying. And that's part of why I was like, that's sort of why I gave up, because I was like, yes, you could probably get it to work in Jupyter Notebooks, but then it's like the whole point was to be able to integrate it.
Yeah.
So I can see, I'll do a little bit of searching as well, but I know other people, I think it's a shame Sam left, because I know she had last year, she presented on her, what's the full, not Jupyter Notebooks, but it's like the Jupyter Labs. And you can switch between kernels, I think, easily within Jupyter Labs.
Oh, okay.
So I think that might be the way to go about it, but I'll also do some searching.
Cool.
Also, I'm gonna cut this part from like the recording that I put up on YouTube, so don't worry about just like sitting here in silence.
Awesome. I'm gonna see if I can switch. Because you can switch kernels in Jupyter Notebooks too, but I've never tried to do like a switch in between. So I'm gonna see if that works.
Helen, are you getting this error that says that you need to load a database to run a command?
Yes. The way I got around that is any like function you're putting in, like create, I put the parentheses sign in front of, and then it works. I don't know why that is the case, but that was the solution I found online.
Yeah, that might be like a
Okay.
MySQL like syntax thing. So
Yeah. So then it was a little annoying, like copying all the code. I just had to add in a bunch like at the start of each line, but I had no trouble running anything else then.
I think if you want to run multiple kernels, you can also do it with a virtual environment. What it sounds like. So I don't know if that's helpful at all. That was like one of the first Google searches that came up. I can't remember if that's how Sam did it. It's a shame we didn't record her tutorial. We did it for a data blitz last year for the intro to coding, just to like show people what you can do.
Yeah, I just tried switching to, I'm within my virtual environment that I kind of use like generally for like Python 3. And it seemed to work okay to switch like midway through, but the thing I can't figure out is it's having trouble now finding the like customer database or like table. And I don't know if that's because I'm not calling it correctly from like how it's stored within the SQL part of the notebook, or if it's like there's not the crosstalk there once I've switched the kernel.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'll see if I can figure that out, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah, that sucks. That Sam was kind of the only one that had the commands up and running. So it's like, but I'll go through them like briefly just to have to walk through.
Cool.
But yeah. Yeah, we'll give it a few more minutes just because I don't want to keep anyone past 3. If anything, I'd like to get a couple extra minutes. That would be nice.
What does this error mean? I'm so
Oh no.
confused.
I don't know.
So not helpful.
This is what I was talking about with SQL. Like the errors are useless. Like they are beyond useless. It took so much time and effort just troubleshooting. So that is one thing, like, if anything, like you should just try SQL like on your own to figure out the errors. Because working in something like, Kaggle, doing an example data set, it's never going to throw you an error like that. But if you do it on your own and you do it, say in RStudio where it's like, oh, here's all these weird errors, it actually gives you a chance to kind of troubleshoot on that in that regard. So this is like something it took me a long time to make this workshop just because of those types of errors. And I gave up on Jupyter notebooks because I was just like, the errors they were giving me, I was like, I don't even know what's wrong to fix it. So that's awful and something we can all look forward to doing our data science jobs in the future. I do have a friend who works for I think it's the state government in Maine. And they actually have to contact IT every time they use SQL.
Oh man.
All right. Do you guys think it would be beneficial if we kind of just went through the examples in this case? Yeah. Kim, do you want some more
that
time?
might be helpful.
Yeah. Do you want more time to troubleshoot, Kim, or?
No, I'm kind of caught up now. I might end up running into an issue that Helen has run into,
Yes.
but
Yeah, the kernels.
at least I'm able to make the data table now.
Yes. Yeah, at least you've run some commands. So there's that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Barring the error, not an error, because that's still popping up.
Yeah, but hey, if it runs, it runs. Cool. So I'll just like briefly go through. It's just just like some of my thought processes, and especially because I had to word these questions very carefully because the words that you use to describe how to do these things include the keywords from SQL. So for example, here for exercise 1, we only want to call certain data from our tables. We only want to see the customer codes from the orders table. So if you guys remembered previously, we would use our select function because we want to select a particular portion of our table. And just because to make it slightly more interactive, what do you think we would select from our customers table?
Selecting the code.
Yes.
That's what I put in mine.
Yes, the cust code.
Yes.
So this is the name of the variable itself, the column name. And then again, we have to say from which table, because if we only had one table, I think you wouldn't have to include this, but most of the time you're going to have several tables. So it's from the orders table. Super simple, like super simple. If you want to filter by a certain criteria, such as the amount of the order, I'm just gonna pop them up. So if you want to select everything from your orders table and only select data that has orders of greater than 1,000, you would do a simple where, and then what's the word I want? like a syntax where, you know, this is like you do the in a while loop or something like that, or a for loop, like for order amount greater than 0 or greater than 1,000, add into extra database. So this is kind of, if anything, it kind of eliminates all the if and while statements that you would have to do, which is really nice, but then slightly annoying because like I learned all this coding syntax. But they're super, they were just so easy that I was like, there's no way I can give you an example and then like have you do something difficult to figure it out. Like this is just kind of telling you how to do it and letting you figure it out on your own was kind of the only way that I was thinking that people would learn anything from this. But yeah, I don't know. Should we go through all of them? I don't know if I don't want to, like, if you guys want to go back and do this, I don't want to spoil it all,
Well,
basically.
so it's running for me on my Jupyter notebook. However, I'm not getting any kind of output underneath the code after it runs.
Okay, interesting. I'm wondering in the SQLite kernel if you have to use the cursor. So I'll scroll all the way back up here in Jupyter Notebooks. So this is how I was looking at tutorials. Then there were several different tutorials. You have to set up this cursor with the connection inside with the cursor, and then you can name it whatever you want here. I just named it cursor, and then you have to do this execute, and then there's another command. I forget what it's called. I forget. So there's a cursor dot something else where you can call the data from the last query that you did inside of cursor execute. So it's like there's an additional step within Jupyter Notebooks to call that data, if that makes sense. Let me see if I could find, I should stop sharing my screen real quick, what it is. I remember seeing this.
Helen, are you having this issue?
Yeah, I didn't have anything appear under each one. And I was looking to see if there was anything else and didn't really find anything about any like recommendations.
Yes, give me one second. I can show you. There's so many different, oh nice, this one's in SQLite, so that's very helpful. I guess, so this one is saying that with SQLite, you should be able to just run it and it would, oh, no, this is just, so it should say how many rows affected. Oh, interesting. So this one actually might be helpful for you guys, where it uses pandas to integrate. So it's the JupySQL package library, I guess, I'm thinking of the equivalent of an R package. And so you can use both pandas and SQL. So then you can integrate it like slightly easier. I don't know if that would be helpful at all.
That seems promising.
Yeah. But I don't see what I was looking for originally. Let me see if I could find. Because there's execute and then there's what else? I know, because you can do execute, commit. There was like a couple of other ways. I can't find it off just through my Google search. I don't know, maybe that pandas is a little bit better.
Mm.
And that's nice because at least then it's integrated. One more. One more Google search to see if I can figure out cursor object. That's what it's called. Aha, here we go. So this has all of the different things you can use with the cursor rather than just the execute button or execute function. So I think the one that, because I had a similar issue when I was trying to originally use SQL in Jupyter Notebooks, and I had to use the fetch all, so the cursor fetch all or fetch one to actually get the query to print out in my terminal. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that is like, if you have to use the cursor within Jupyter Notebooks, that's a really important function of it, that you have to do all these other things. Which is why I was like, I don't like this, I'm giving up. I feel like that the whole cursor thing is what really threw me for Jupyter Notebooks, because it was so easy in R, and I was like, what in the world is going on? But for now, I guess I'll keep going through. I'll just briefly go through this because you guys aren't using R, and I wasn't able to figure out how to do this in Python. So maybe if the pandas things works out, we can like append an extra section on how to do that in Jupyter Notebooks. But for, I guess, just people watching afterwards. So what's really nice about using SQL in R is being able to manipulate that data within R. So you have to create all of your tables within SQL before you can do this, but they would already be created likely when you start a job anywhere anyway. So this is kind of just the easy, simple way to go about doing this in R. So you use this db read table function. You have to supply the connection that you're using, and then you just identify what table you want and you load it into a variable. And that is literally it. So this is done in an R code chunk, so you don't even have to call SQL to do this. And that's why we supplied the DBI library here, and then call it using this. So this is me just loading in my agents, customer and orders tables, and I just made little variables to load them into, and then I use them here. So you can see I use them just like any other R code you've ever encountered, which is really convenient. I was able to make really quick, easy graphs using them. I ran a little ANOVA based on the opening amount, looking to see if it was significantly different between customer country, and based on this graph I expected it to be, and it was. So we have our p-value here, so you can see why you can't do this with SQL. You can't actually do any data analysis. So this is a really nice way, especially even if a lot of things that I see when I look at data science postings is like, you need to be able to do visualizations. So it's like, where are you going to do visualizations? Not in SQL. So if you have a lot of experience in R, this is the perfect kind of little intersection that helps you do that. And so if people are following along, I would pause now and see if you can figure out how to load in your data and then do a regression with whatever variables and whatever tables you want. But for now, I do want to kind of introduce advanced functions because these are super crazy. So I know like in R, advanced functions are like a little complicated, but I feel like they're approachable. But some of the advanced functions in SQL are like wild. You can do so much with it. Some of the stuff even, I think there's an article here for Free Code Camp. Some of the things they were describing, I was like, I don't even know what that means. I don't even understand how to approach that. So these functions are really about automation, about making things quick and easy, about being able to do the same things over and over again. And then being able to create really complex queries that kind of select certain types of data and manipulate that data in a certain way to be able to analyze later. So one of the advanced functions I really wanted to touch on is stored procedures, because it's something that we've seen before. But I do really recommend going to both of these links and kind of looking through some of the advanced procedures that they do have. There are tutorials on those. And I think once you have this basic understanding of how SQL works, it's a little bit more approachable. But some of it, I was like, I don't want to mess up and tell people wrong things. So I'm just going to refer to these resources for those types of things. I also don't think, going in, we're not going to be applying for advanced SQL jobs because we don't have degrees in SQL and all we've done is attended this workshop. So I don't think that's something you have to be super concerned about, but I think it's nice to see kind of where the upper limit is in terms of like your ability to code in SQL. It does eventually get difficult, but if you're just being introduced to it on a basic level, it's super easy. So what I like about stored procedures is that it's kind of mimics something that we've learned recently with the coding outreach group summer workshops, which is functions in R. So a stored procedure is just a function. So you have something that you do all the time. Maybe it's, once a week, you scrape the data from whatever source that you get your data for your company. And you need to append that data up to a table in a database you work with. You can actually create a statement that does that for you, where you don't have to code it every time. And you could just execute the stored procedure and go about your day, which is really nice. So it has this general syntax. So I think the further in you get with SQL, the more lines there are in a query. That's the thing that I've noticed is I've seen queries 10 lines long. So it gets to be really complicated if you want it to be. And it's a really general kind of format. So you have create, so you're creating, in this case, a procedure. So we use this create function for a multitude of things. You give it a name, whatever name you'd like, and then you have this as, almost like if you're doing an if statement in Bash, where you have the do function, this is as whatever. So it tells it what the statement itself will be, and you hit go to run that creation of the procedure. And then if you wanted to execute it at any time, you do exec and procedure name. I know it's a different word for everything else. MySQL is the only one that uses exec. So I forget what it is for everyone else, but that is something that you can Google and figure out if you're using MySQL or something else. So in this case, I wanted to create a procedure where we select all of the cities. What did I do here? A procedure where, I wanted to select the data by whatever city. So in this case, you can actually create part of the function where you can load in a variable that you want. So say you do the same thing, but across different companies, or companies within the data set, or, clients within the data set, you can have this at city function or at whatever you'd like. And that allows you to kind of input different data, different variables across time within the same exact stored procedure, which is really convenient. So this is kind of if, again, so we're kind of referring back to Bash here. So you do for S in whatever, and then you can use that S variable as a placeholder for if you want to loop through multiple things. So it's really convenient if you want to do multiple different things with the stored procedure. So in this case, we're creating a procedure called city select, and you have to tell it at the beginning what the variable name will be within the procedure, and then what type of data that variable will be. So again, this is what you'll be typing in yourself. It's kind of annoying to have to denote what type of variable it'll be, but this is a very SQL specific necessary thing. I have to add go underneath this. I don't know how that happened. But so you're just telling it, the procedure name, and then this is only if you're going to input variables in your exec function. And so for this, I'm just selecting all of the columns from the customer table where customer city is whatever I'm inputting into the stored procedure. So I want to look at just one city for all of our data. I can do this, and then so you go down to exec, and then you say this is the stored procedure function, and then you have to tell it what variable you want to replace this at city variable that you've already included in your stored procedure. And so because this is a character, you have to make sure you include the single quotes. If it was for an amount, you do not have to include that, at least for MS SQL. For MySQL, because you include the quotes, I believe you include the quotes. But that's, again, on a server to server basis. I will let you guys try and do this. This is a little bit difficult. I don't know, you guys don't have to try it live right now, but if you're watching this recording, I would recommend trying this out and then just clicking the show button. But I think unless you guys want to go over something specific or want to talk about anything else, I can play the conclusion, and then you guys can we can keep troubleshooting if you want, to try and figure out Jupyter Notebooks. Hopefully, I think that Pandas solution looked pretty promising, but I guess I'm not sure. I don't know, do you guys have any thoughts?
I'm happy to do the video and then continue on. I probably just have to jump off after the video, but
yeah, no worries. Cool, then I'll just do that now and we can end the recording there. And then if anyone has any questions or concerns, you can always email Billy and I, contact us at wherever you need to contact us. And then hopefully for those actually watching the recording, maybe there'll be a little bit more additional information within the workshops after we've gotten the chance to kind of add some stuff in. So let's play this.
Hey again, everybody. So if you're seeing this, it means you've made it to the end of the tutorial. Congratulations, and thank you for sticking it out with us. I'm just going to be touching on a few sort of closing thoughts. So what's the use for us here, right? You've already seen how SQL can be useful. You've seen in practice what we use it for. But as academics, in like a broader sense, like why is this important to us, right? So I sort of, in my mind, break this up into two very broad categories. It might be the case that even as an academic, you find yourself collaborating with one of these like industry groups who have access to this really large, rich data set. If you are interested in something like sentiment on Twitter or Reddit, you could always do data scraping, but this is like it's far more efficient. It's far more clean if you could get access to the data that these groups are managing themselves. And if you find yourself in that situation, you're going to want to have some sort of experience with managing large data sets, right? And it's also just great to keep your employment options open, given the precarious job market that exists in academia that we all don't want to think about. Data is also just only getting larger as people integrate more like large language models and AI sort of collaborations in their work in a lot of different fields. That data is massive. You're probably going to be using SQL or a SQL-like language in order to like manage it and to work with it. And so having these skills sort of like gets you in on like the ground floor. It gives you like a little bit of a basis for you to expand upon later, depending upon what you need. And what we covered today, a lot of it would be considered sort of like beginner SQL. Advanced SQL users usually categorize things like extracting, inserting, and updating information in data tables as sort of beginner skills. Also using conditional filtering to pull out the information that you specifically need, and then joining multiple data tables together. These are all sort of like beginner SQL skills. What separates beginners from advanced are some of these things that are over on the right here. So integrating statistical concepts and softwares to analyze queried data. As researchers, we do this pretty frequently, whether it be t-tests, ANOVAs, regressions, multi-level models or mixed effects models. This is stuff that I think we all sort of a little bit more intuitively are comfortable with. And so we have like a little bit of a leg up, but where the divide exists is actually using the software to like combine these two things together, right? Katie went over that a little bit at the end, but there's still like a whole world of integration that exists that you should really familiarize yourself with if you wanted to go in this direction. One example that I wanted to just note that is built into SQL itself, so you wouldn't necessarily need R or Python or something else like that to use it, would be delta queries. So a delta query would allow you to make comparisons across a time series. If you wanted to query sales from this month and sales from last month and run an analysis to see how they've changed over time, you would be using a delta query, and that's something that's built right into SQL. Some other advanced SQL skills that you might want to familiarize yourself with would be creating common table expressions. So from our perspective, this would be something equivalent to like making a person level data frame based upon all the individual observations that you got from your participants, right? Common table expressions can be tables where you keep all of your scrap work or supplementary data that you're not necessarily really focusing on right now, but want to have access to later. And then other tools to make your querying more efficient. So these could include nested subqueries. wherein you are making queries in multiple tables at once. And the queries that you're making in those multiple tables are unique to each of those tables, so that you're not necessarily pulling in 2 tables, and then once you get those tables in, making more queries to cut out more data and more data and more data. You're being extremely precise about the data that you want from each table. And then indexing, which is partially the responsibility, as I understand it, of a server manager to make sure that the data is kept in a nice, tidy structure that everybody can understand and access. But it's also on the responsibility of the users to make sure that it sort of like stays in that structure, and that when they add new data to that table, that they are not messing up with that structure. So using indexing again to get exactly precisely what information we want from a table, and then using indexing again to add data to a very specific, precise space within that table is very important to like the health of a SQL server. And then lastly, I just wanted to like highlight a few resources that you can use if you did want to like go beyond this and build your SQL skills. So Katie had put in this Git repository some resources, lists of commands and things like that that can really help you get started. If while you are sort of getting started, you find yourself a little bit stuck, there's the MySQL forums and documentation, which I think are very good. Please note that I think there are some slight deviations from like SQL iteration to like SQL, not iteration, instantiation, from version to version, right? But for the most part, a lot of these commands are going to be pretty common across different versions of SQL. And then lastly, Microsoft actually has some really great SQL tutorials that you can access. Again, I know you guys cannot click on these links right now, but this PowerPoint file will be saved within the GitHub repository. So if you're not going to type this out, you can just go in there and click on the URL there. But regardless, thank you guys so much for joining us. I know it's probably been a very long day, but we look forward to seeing you next week.
Cool. Thank you, Billy, for that conclusion. So that's the end of the workshop. Hopefully people following along, that was helpful. Thank you guys for working through and despite all the errors that we encountered, hopefully if you were able to get Jupyter Notebooks working, we'll add that in to the workshop itself so people can kind of do that as well. But if you guys have any questions, obviously you can always message me. For next week, we do have text analysis in R, which will be really fun. Camille Johnson will be presenting on how to load in, clean, and visualize text data, which I know is actually really great for things like natural language processing, also very industry related. So be sure to check that out next week. Thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate it. Stop the recording.